This event occurred when I was 10 years old on Halloween night. At the time, I was still a stick-thin girl with nothing to actually distinguish that I was a girl. Especially since earlier that year, I decided I didn't want to be confused with my twin sister anymore. So I'd gotten a pixie cut and I had began dressing in black. At the time, I had no girlfriends, but up the road half a mile was my friend Austin and another mile and a half up, Quinn. I had really become close with them and would often go exploring and fishing with them, so it was only natural that we decided that the three of us would go trick-or-treating together. Compared to Austin in my neighborhood, Quinn's was the more wealthier one, so in hopes of getting the best candy, we decided we'd go to Quinn's. I had been to Quinn's house a few times, but most of the time we hung out, we'd walk another mile up from Quinn's to the Rudders, which was our local gas station for Slurpees, and then another 2 miles down from my house to the park and lake. So Austin and I weren't too familiar with this neighborhood and the ones around it. But I digress. My mother had a new boyfriend at the time, so she didn't really care what I was doing. She would have gotten mad if she'd known I was hanging out with boys again. It was Pennsylvania, so it was super cold, so any costume I had on was pretty much covered with my jacket and leggings. I had been a dark fairy, so you could still guess what I was just because of the black sparkly wings. Anyways, I had left early to go walk to Austin's house. When I got there, I had to ask Austin what he was because he was in a white button-up, black dress pants, as well as a tie and a heavy black jacket over it. He moved his jacket to show me the cheap sheriff's badge attached to his belt and told me he was a detective. I had laughed and his parents shooed us away. I remember his dad grumbling about what was a boy doing with sparkly wings, when I then realized he'd been talking about me, which definitely dampened my spirits. Austin's dad was drinking though, so I didn't correct him. Austin attempted to cheer me up the entire way to Quinn's house, and soon all was forgotten. Quinn's house was the biggest house I had ever been at the time. It was in a really nice neighborhood with houses on each side that looked just like his. Quinn's mother welcomed us warmly, and she had gave us treats to start off our trick-or-treating. Quinn definitely had the best costume of all of us. A realistic-looking Grim Reaper robe with a black screen over the face, with red glowing eyes, and a plastic bloody sheath. Quinn's neighborhood was swamped with kids from my school, and soon we had gone through almost the entire neighborhood, with our bags really weighing us down. It was getting late, but Quinn wanted us to continue on, and Austin and I were in no rush to go home, so we agreed despite how dark it was getting. Quinn had told us that there was a shortcut to the other neighborhood through his backyard if we went down the hill and then through the trees for a while. Now, that kind of freaked me out, but being the only girl, I wasn't about to let on that I was scared. So I gulped when this was suggested, but nodded my approval, and off we went. Quinn had taken off his mask to better see as we stumbled down Quinn's backyard and decides to leave his sheath behind. We start through the woods, and within about 5 minutes of walking and joking, we all then realized that none of us had thought to bring a flashlight. But it was fall, so there were no leaves on the trees, and light from the moon really helped to light up the way, if only enough not to walk into a tree. Austin asks how much longer, and I can tell by the hitch in his voice that he likes this shortcut just about as much as I do. Before Quinn can answer, we hear a crunch from somewhere up ahead of us, and we all freeze as Quinn sticks up a hand in the air to silence us. "Did you guys hear that?" Quinn says. I remain silent, but Austin snorts and replies, "Stop it, Quinn. That's not going to work. You're not going to scare us." Quinn gasps and then says, "I'm not joking. I really thought I heard something." And before I can tell them both just to keep walking, a shape in the darkness catches my eyes. It's up ahead of us, maybe 20 feet. It's dark, so I can't really distinguish anything, but it's only a moment later that no guessing is needed.
"Well, hey there, boys,"
came a strange man's reply from the spot. Quinn and Austin turn in horror as the man continues to walk towards us. "What? Who are you?" stammers Quinn. With this, a deep laugh bellows out of the man.
Oh, me? I'm the devil.
This whole time he's walking closer to us, but in the silhouette of darkness, I see no signs of this man wearing a costume. No horns or anything. This is my property. What are you doing in the woods? Quinn demands, sounding less brave with each syllable.
Oh, me? I'm just out for a stroll. I don't really get out nearly as often as I'd like.
He responds smoothly. Now he's about 10 feet from us, halfway peeking out from behind a tree. Quinn, let's just get out of here, I say. But Quinn, in a moment of bravery or stupidity, which is debatable, yells out to the man. What the hell's wrong with you? Stop talking to us. We're just trying to get through. And with that, Quinn nudges Austin and I and begins making a wide turn around the man, who silently watches us and spins around the tree with just his head and hands sticking out to watch us as we walk past. Austin then says to me, "It's Halloween. He's just trying to scare us." I don't respond, just keep my eyes locked on the man. He then yells,
I hope I haven't scared you boys. I just really like your costumes. Why don't you come closer and let me have a better look?
Immediately that comment sent up red flags to me, because you couldn't tell what Austin was, especially at a distance, and with Quinn's hood and sheath gone, you couldn't tell what he was either. That left me, and I didn't like that.
Hey you, boy with the wings. Come over here. Let me help you fly.
And with that, he just started laughing again. Now, I had been getting bullied for how short my hair was, and Quinn and Austin knew how much it hurt me every time I was mistaken for a boy, so they had taken up to sticking up for me, and unfortunately, tonight was no exception. "Hey, stop talking to her, you creep!" Austin yelled, and with that, he picked up a rock and threw it at the man. It bounced off the tree where the man was half covered, and the man suddenly did a creepy little half jump, half dance, and clapped his hands.
Her? You're a girl? That's even better.
And with that, he, much like a wild animal, bounded forward, hands first on all fours. I immediately dropped my candy, and all three of us began screaming our heads off and running. I don't think he chased us long, but with the crunching under our feet and our screams, it was pretty much impossible to tell. I quickly had to abandon my wings too, as they continued to get stuck to branches as we weaved through the trees in pure terror. We didn't stop until we made it through the trees and onto a well-lit street, though there were very few kids out at this point anyway. We were now over 15 minutes away from Quinn's house and probably an hour plus walk back to my house, and it was only getting later. Quinn had dropped his bag too. Only Austin kept his, clutching it like it were a child. We took the long-lit way back to Quinn's house in almost complete silence, terrified the man would appear again, but he didn't. When we actually made it, we frantically explained what happened, and though sympathetic, Quinn's mom said we couldn't call the police. She said that nothing had happened and we had no description of the man, and that it was Halloween. The man was probably long gone, and also was almost definitely just trying to scare us. She drove Austin and I home, and I ended up getting grounded for being out so late and also leaving my costume behind. I didn't even bother to explain what had happened, and she didn't seem to notice that I had no candy. The next day, though, I couldn't go out because I was grounded. Quinn came over with his mom and gave me a bag of candy that they had bought, because he knew I had lost mine in the woods. We never talked about it again after that, all convincing ourselves that it was probably just some creepy Halloween prank that went too far. So did the devil, or whoever you are. I really, really hope to never see you again, and especially on Halloween.
Game off star is typing.
Is anyone else bored? I don't want to play Gmod anymore, and I don't want to play 4 more hours of Battlefield 1.
JRev13 is typing.
Nah, man. I'm having fun. It's just you.
LMI Legend is typing.
Yeah, I'm bored too. Let's go do some other shit. I lean back in my chair and close my eyes, It was 4 a.m., and I had school tomorrow. My friends finally convinced me to pull an all-night gaming marathon. I sighed, knowing that I would regret this in the morning, and finally forced myself to open my eyes. We gotta pass the time somehow. We got like 2.5 hours left until school. What do you guys suggest? Hey, how about World of Tanks? I thought about it for a second, but World of Tanks was really not my type of game. If anything, I wanted to play some Rainbow Six Siege, but nobody else in my group liked it. They thought it was really slow-paced and wasn't a lot of fun. Yeah, no, f*** World of Tanks. Too gritty anyways, and not fun enough to grind for good tanks. Yeah, man, I guess I can agree with that. Hey, can we start a group call or something? I'm sick of typing. Hell no. My ears hurt from wearing this headset for 8 hours, and I don't want to hear you guys talking into it. I just want to play. Sound off, KK?
Martin has joined this room.
Who the f*** is Martin? I got no clue. Who invited him? Yeah, not me. Hey, Martin, who the f*** are you?
Martin is typing.
Hello, friend.
Alright, which one of you guys is using an alternate account? I'm not prone to spooks. Good effort, though. Hey man, I'm not doing it. Yeah, same here. Kick him maybe? Yeah, I got it. I place my hand on the mouse and click on Martin's name. What came up was a profile with no name, bio, and a solid black profile picture. Scrolling down, I discovered that the account had only been made a few days before. Okay, seriously, who the f*** is doing it? The account was made like a few days ago. It's not me, man. Hey, just kick him already, and let's go play something. Alright. I'm really curious to see which one of you guys did it. I right-clicked on Martin and multiple options came up. I clicked on kick, and clicked out of the menu. Okay, he should be gone now. It was probably Legend though, man.
Martin is typing.
Seriously, it's one of you. And if you don't tell me, I'll kick you. I promise.
Group call started.
I nearly fell out of my chair, not realizing that my speakers were actually not muted. The sudden ring caught me off guard. I quickly hit mute on the speakers and turned back to the screen.
Martin, LMI Legend, plus one other person are calling.
I was starting to worry. This was just too bizarre to ignore. I tried kicking Martin again, but it didn't work. Confused, I looked at the call pop-up. Whoever this was, I decided that I should at least play along for now. I moved the mouse over to the green pickup call button and clicked. The text to the chat room was replaced by the call screen, showing the profile picture of my two friends, along with the solid black profile picture that this Martin guy had. I quickly plugged in my headphones and put them on. Breathing. The sound of someone breathing into their microphone was what I was greeted with. When I put on my headphones, it was extremely loud, like the person had the microphone right up to their mouth. The microphone clearly did not have a pop filter, as the breathing came out loud and distorted. I quickly turned down my volume, as the breathing was beginning to hurt my head. In the background I heard both of my friends talking, but I simply could not make out what they were saying. After a little while, both of my friends hung up. Putting my hand on the mouse, I began moving it towards the red hang up button, but I was interrupted by a sudden change on my screen. The solid black square of a profile picture was replaced with a loading icon. This Martin person was turning on their camera. Now here's something that you need to know about me. Whenever I see something on the internet that I simply doubt, I will ask questions. If somebody shows me a supposedly haunted video, I usually just end up laughing and counter it with simple logic. However, what I saw was something completely different. It was not a hoax. What I saw was real. The loading icon disappeared and was replaced with an image. Black. That was the first thing I saw. Then, I saw a slight movement. As I examined the darkness more and more, I realized that I was seeing somebody walking. At first, I wasn't sure where, but then I saw grass. It wasn't very visible, but I saw it. Suddenly the darkness was replaced by a bright light. The person walking had just turned on a flashlight. I looked closely and saw grass, as well as a tree in the distance. The person then turned around, and my blood ran cold with terror. I realized exactly where the man was. When he turned around, he pointed the camera at a house. It was pitch black, except for a single bright and slightly yellow glow coming from the second-floor window. Right next to the man was my father's grill, with folding chairs placed around it. To the far right of the house, I saw the small garden shed that we had, specifically used for storing tools. The man was standing in my backyard. I leapt out of my chair and ran downstairs to make sure both the front and back doors were locked. Realizing that they were, I ran back upstairs and looked at my screen. Scrolled down past the countless messages of my friends, asking me if I was okay, or if I was asleep, to see a single message from Martin.
I go in now.
I looked to the single window in my room, overlooking the backyard. My backyard was mostly empty, with almost nothing but a tree in the middle. On the tree stood a man, a very tall yet thin man. This man was wearing almost nothing, other than some tore-up jeans and a shirt. He must have triggered the motion sensor garden lights, as the whole garden was now lit up. I could see almost every detail, and what I saw terrified me. The man was crouching on a branch, with a crazed spark in his eyes. His mouth was now stretched into a wide, insane grin, and I could see his horrible, rotten yellow teeth. In his hand, he held a mobile phone and a flashlight. Suddenly, he tossed the flashlight and his phone to the side. He leapt down off the tree and towards the back door of the house. I heard loud banging noises and what sounded like wailing coming from downstairs. My parents burst through my door, asking me what the hell was going on. My younger brother stood by their side, grasping at my father's leg. I didn't know what to say, so I just told them that there was a man downstairs trying to get in. They rushed downstairs and told me to lock my brother in the upstairs bathroom. Holding my brother's hand, we walked together towards the bathroom. Closing and locking the door, I sprinted downstairs towards the back door and almost vomited. The insane man was dragging the body of my father along the ground. I screamed and locked the back door, only to see the insane man dash towards the door through the door's window. Stumbling back in fear, I ran to the upstairs bathroom and asked my brother to unlock the door. He complied, and I rushed in, locking it behind me. I have been sitting in this damned bathroom for hours, with nothing but my brother and my laptop. My little brother keeps telling me that he's hungry. I don't know if I can take much more of this, but starving to death seems better than confronting that monster. My laptop is almost dead now, and I don't know what to do. A few hours back, I heard the sound of a window sliding open, and for the last hour I've been hearing this insane babbling, as well as the sound of footsteps, and it sounds as if this thing is running all over the house, looking for us. The worst part is 5 minutes ago it all stopped. I no longer heard footsteps or the insane babbling. The banging is gone as well. The worst part is that deep down, I want those sounds to come back, because anything is better than listening to this thing sit patiently outside my door, breathing and scratching at the handle.
I used to live with the biggest idiot on the face of the earth. Hector was this 6-foot Afro-Latino dude from New Jersey who had two distinct modes of being. Either he was a tornado of anger, or he was manically laughing at something. Rarely was there any in between. When you caught him in his laughing mood, he was tolerable at best, but catch him in one of his angry moods and he was totally unbearable. He was a roadie for some post-hardcore band that toured up and down the East Coast a bunch, which was one of the few good things about being his roommate. The fact that he spent weeks away at a time from the apartment but still paid rent. But whenever he was home, well, here's an example. It's July in East Harlem. I have the windows open. Latin brass band music is flowing through the afternoon air from some other open window, and I'm sipping Southern Peach lemonade like life is good. Out of nowhere, Hector bursts into the apartment, covered in brick dust, like, "I need bricks, bro. You got bricks?" I just started driving Uber while trying to get my stand-up career up and running, so no, I didn't have any bricks. And even if I did, I wouldn't have been sharing them with Hector. And suddenly he's like, "There's bricks on the roof." And as he runs out of the apartment and towards the stairwell of the building, I hear these kids shouting from outside the window. Then I look out to see this group of kids, like 11-year-old kids, all shouting stuff in Spanish at our building. They see me, start flipping me off and whatnot before they suddenly scatter in all directions. Then bam, a brick lands right in the spot where they were before they scattered. See, that's the type of guy Hector was. He could go out for a pack of rips and find himself in a brick fight with a bunch of Puerto Rican kids on the way back. Never in my life have I ever had a fight with a preteen, let alone one involving projectiles. But around Hector, that stuff was like a daily occurrence. So come that October, Hector is headed out on some big Halloween tour with one of his bands, and he tells me he won't be back till the second week of November. That meant I'd have to cover half of the rent until then, something I'd have to borrow money to do. This causes a big fight, and for the first time since I moved in, I thought Hector might actually hit me. And being the kind of guy that he was, I knew for a fact that if it came to violence, he wouldn't just stop at one punch. So when the time came for him to go on tour, the mood in the apartment isn't just at its low point. I'm legit scared for my physical safety. He leaves. I'm looking for a new apartment, and life is not so good anymore. So a few nights later, the night before Halloween actually, I'm sitting in the little kitchen area, eating arepas and looking for other apartments. Someone buzzes the apartment, so I go to see who it is. This is back when we had intercoms, but they sucked and barely worked half the time, so when I hear some guy with an accent says something like, "I need an apartment number 3, but the buzzer's not working," I just buzz the guy in without a second thought. New York is a city built on takeout, delivery, and street food, so I'm hardly going to be all suspicious over a delivery driver. But I should have been, and I almost paid with my life for it. Those guys busted our front door open like it was nothing, just smashed the lock right through with a sledgehammer. I actually thought it was the cops at first because they just piled in, guns drawn, shouting, "Get on the floor, get down." But then the way that they were talking to each other once I was lying face down on the linoleum, that clued me into the fact that they were just stick-up guys. But what were they doing in my apartment? My first thought was, Jesus Christ, Hector, whose toes do you step on now? But before I can wonder anymore, one of the guys starts asking me, "Where is it? Where is it?" I'm like, "Where's what?" But that just makes them mad. I get this flurry of kicks that have me balled up in the fetal position, then they ask me again. I can't tell them anything else, so I just say, I don't know what you're talking about. There's $20 in my wallet, that's all I got on me." The offer of $20 just offended them, and I get more kicks before they start tossing the apartment like they're looking for something. And when I say tossing, I really do mean trashing. They're deliberately breaking stuff, pulling drawers all the way out and then throwing them at other stuff. It was just destruction in every sense of the word, and it was around then that I got a look at a couple of the guys. They're all messed up or have stuff over their faces. They're wearing all black, gloves and the works. They were professional stick-up guys, probably robbed drug dealers for a living, but Hector wasn't dealing. I mean, I think I'd have noticed at some point. I saw a lot of broken guitars and amplifiers around the apartment, but not too many piles of coke or money. Then right as I'm about to think it, one of the guys comes out with it. "You sure this is the right place, man?" I don't know. Homie told me he keeps it behind the bathtub sometimes, but these people only got a shower in there." I feel this wave of relief washing over me. They got the wrong place, so they're gonna just walk out, right? Maybe take my phone so I can't call the cops. So, like I said, I told them my phone was on the table, next to my food, and that I wouldn't call the cops if they just left. Cuck move, maybe, but it's amazing how zen you get about material possessions when you see a Glock in someone's hand. The stick-up guys kind of pause and look at each other. Then right as I think they're about to just leave, one of them says, "I think you seen my face, man, when we were breaking in. He's gotta go." One of them has the gun, and the guy who wants me dead starts reaching to take it off the guy who has it, but the guy who has it doesn't want to give it up. That was my cue to soil myself and start begging for my life. It wasn't my proudest moment, and peeing my pants was by no means metaphorical, but it is what it is looking back. They're arguing over shooting me. I'm begging for my life. It's just chaos and them shouting in there, and I'm amazed no one had called the cops already. But then boom. The front entrance of the apartment building slams shut, and I can hear a very familiar voice coming up the stairs. I'm not even going to type out what Hector was saying. I'd be canceled and deleted from the internet within seconds after posting, but let's just say someone had canceled their tour 3 days in, and he was livid about it. Going on calling them every name under the sun, ranting and raving as he pounded his way up the stairs, and in the apartment, both me and the stick-up guys are about frozen in anticipation. Then right as Hector is about to come into the apartment, he says something like, "Hey, I got your money, you whiny little baby. What the The guy with the gun aims it at Hector as he walks in, looking around at the pure destruction that greeted him. "Who are you people?" he screamed. "Who are you?" the guy with the gun screamed back. Hector is just gone by this point, foaming at the mouth, looking like he's got one of his eyeballs about to pop when he comes back. "I live here!" Then, I swear to God, I watch as Hector basically turns into a drunk, slightly overweight Jason Bourne. He swings his backpack off his shoulder and just launches it at the shooter. He knocks the guy slightly off balance, messes up his aim, but by the time he can rearrange himself, Hector football tackles this guy onto the carpet and just starts wailing on him. The 2 other guys then jump in, and I'm thinking, oh Jesus God, someone's about to get shot. When out of nowhere, Hector comes up and is just windmailing punches at both guys, holding his own until he goes down again. Then almost immediately, both guys start backing up, hands in the air, and there's Hector, holding the gun he'd almost just been shot with, telling both the guys to back up. His face is bleeding. He's totally gassed, but there he is, having just won a freaking fistfight with 3 guys, one of them armed. He then sits on the KO'd shooter's back, tells the other guys to get out of his apartment, and tells me to dial 911. And only when the cops show up to arrest the guy he'd managed to detain did he realize he'd been stabbed in the shoulder. That night, as he got stitched up at the hospital, I sifted through all the broken and non-broken stuff, swept up all the broken glass and ceramics, and generally tried to put the apartment back in order. He got back at around 1 a.m., still drunk after the doctor told him, "Do not drink on these painkillers," and immediately started complaining about the break-in. I just carried on cleaning up, stopping only briefly to say something deeply heartfelt. "Hector, dude, I just wanted to say I think you might have saved my life today, dude, and I just wanted to say thank you." I felt my throat kind of tighten as I said it, very similar to the way it's doing now as I'm typing this, remembering. Hector looked up at me, with this look in his eyes that almost made it look like I'd gotten through to him, until he replied with, "Whatever, you could have jumped in at any time." I didn't mind. I knew Hector well enough by that point to know he wasn't exactly in touch with his feelings. But as he immediately sought to leave the room due to the uncomfortable amount of emotion in the air, he turned and said, "Did you see the look on those guys' faces, though? It's hilarious, dude." And he just walked off to his bedroom, laughing that evil toddler laugh that makes my skin crawl, even today. You see, for just over a year I shared an apartment with the biggest idiot on the face of the earth. And I owe that idiot my life. Please, New York, don't ever change. This is less of a creepy one-person encounter and more of a whole community creeped out by one man. The neighbor in question is somewhat famous for his lawn, an impossibly thick green landscape that he had tended by a company. I'm vaguely aware of him losing it on the landscapers, screaming at them outside. Enough I knew he had a temper. The first real red flag that he might be legit crazy came last summer. He asked a teenage boy in the neighborhood to check in on the house once a day and make sure all the doors and windows were secured and water their flowers. The day they left, though, he left a crazy list, saying the kid had to be there multiple times a day, turning off and on different sets of lights at specific times, and leaving weird chores for him. Also, the kid was not allowed to walk on the lawn, and he had to remove his dirty shoes before walking on the concrete sidewalk. He was never to enter the house, but was to turn off and on the lights from the doorway by means of a stick with a loop on it. Also, he was not allowed to use the garden hose to water the lawn, and had to instead use a teeny tiny watering can. The letter implied that my neighbor would have the kid under surveillance and would have pictures if he failed to comply. Basically, the kid's parents called him and said they weren't comfortable with the situation anymore, and while they would keep an eye on the house, the deal was off. They argued over the phone. When my neighbor got back from vacation, it was early morning, and he immediately went to their house, woke them, and tried to pick a fight with them. One of the other neighbors is a retired colonel and came out to see what was going on and tried to settle the issue. Crazy neighbor said that he would let it rest if he was allowed to bare-ass spank the kid. He flipped out when they told him hell no. Sometime after this, another neighbor was at the grocery store when he was concerned by Crazy Neighbor. Crazy Neighbor apparently just talked at him in rapid fire for a half hour. Among other things, he started saying how wives shouldn't have friends, and said that his wife's sister was so fat she broke the toilet seat last time she visited. After this, everyone started talking about how you don't see his wife anywhere. Occasionally she will be out watering flowers, but while her husband is seen out, she isn't. Considering that she used to be a social butterfly, this is weird. During the winter, everyone found pamphlets on their mailbox from the landscaper he uses, along with a note saying it was mandatory to now use this landscaper in our area, and failure to comply will result in being sued. We are private, single-family homes with no homeowners association, so this is patently untrue. During the winter, someone saw his wife and her arm was in a sling and she had a black eye. When they went to ask her about it, he wouldn't let her speak and said she had slid on ice. Since then, there have been a few attempts made to talk to her alone, and all have failed. They've gone so far as to get their church involved and to call a welfare check by the cops when he was out of the house. But if she is being abused, she has been refusing help. Snow was bad this year, and he blew a fit about the snowplows piling snow on his property. So he scattered screws on the roadway outside before they came one morning. Then someone in the neighborhood got a puppy. It's quiet and has a fenced-in backyard. Its owners wake up in the middle of the night to the doorbell ringing. When they come out, Crazy Neighbor is standing on the road at the edge of the property. He tells them that the first time the dog gets out, they won't have a dog anymore, and he pulls out a gun and waves it around before pointing it towards the backyard and saying, "Bang." Obviously, they go back inside and call the cops. When confronted, Crazy Neighbor claims he was out for a walk, thought they were awake and stopped by. He says he didn't get the gun out, but it had been on his belt, and that he didn't mean his statement as a threat. He ended up getting some sort of citation from the police. Come spring, He has taken to sitting outside and writing something every time someone walks or drives by. We don't know what, but I have taken to driving differently home to avoid going by him. Most recently, someone put up a swing set in their backyard. They came back from work to find tire tracks through the backyard and the swing set run over and crushed. No one saw anything, but his massive truck happens to have the same kind of tires as the tread arcs left behind. The retired colonel has taken to compiling statements from everyone and keeping records, because we think this is going to end badly. I'm an uninteresting man in my late 20s with a stable job and happy family. Being so, I had never even entertained the thought that I might, one day, be the target of a stalker. So here's my story as a warning to everyone. You don't have to be a typical, pretty young lady to catch the eye of a stalker. I don't know if this makes sense, but I am a habitual yet very casual Facebook user. I don't post a lot, but I do check my news feed often. One Saturday night I was doing a quick round on Facebook before I went to bed when I received a friend request. I accepted it without hesitation. Just about every friend request I receive gets accepted because I don't ever post anything very personal. As I said, I have a very casual approach to social networking. I do a quick glance on the profile that had friended me and saw that it was an obviously fake account. Not thinking much of it, I put my computer away and fell asleep. The next day, I was having lunch at a friend's house, having completely forgotten about the friend request from the night before. My phone buzzed and I saw that I had gotten a message from a coworker of mine, Maya. Although Maya and I worked together and had a few mutual friends outside of work, we didn't communicate much other than when it was about work. I checked it, assuming it was work-related. I guess looking back, you can say it was. To get the gist of it, the Facebook account that friended me also friended Maya and had bombarded her with insults and accusations of being a whore, slut, and every name in the book. The person took it a step further by messaging Maya's husband, saying that she was cheating on him with a coworker. Maya wanted to know if I knew who the person was, because I was the only other person that accepted the friend request. I explained to her how I accept every request and have no idea who it was. I then proceeded to unfriend the profile in question. Maya explained to me that she already had suspicions on who it was, but just wanted to see if I could confirm it. She believed it was Carrie. Let's rewind to a few weeks earlier. I had received a friend request from Carrie. It struck me as odd because, although we worked at the same place, we had never met, never spoken, nor had we ever made eye contact or been within 20 feet of each other. We worked in different departments, but I walked past her every day because I had to walk through her department to get to our lounge. That was the furthest extent of our interactions. I only learned her name from when she friended me on Facebook and I recognized her picture. I'm not sure how she found out my name. Carrie also friended my wife's profile and subsequently began to sift through years of my wife's posts and pictures, liking and commenting on several of them. She began interacting with my posts too, as though she knew us as well. At work though, I'd walk by like usual and still no interaction. I found it odd, but didn't look too far into it. So back to the present, the mysterious Facebook account continued to harass Maya until she told her that she knew it was Carrie and was going to call the police. I thought that was the end of that, but boy, was I wrong. Over several weeks, I began getting more friend requests from girls looking to hook up with me. Obviously, I knew they were all fake, and for the most part, I ignored them. I also began getting notifications from Google and Facebook accounts about suspicious activity on my profile. Most of the time, it warned me of failed login attempts. One I specifically remember said my Facebook account was actually logged in from somewhere unusual and asked whether it was me. It wasn't me, and I should have been more concerned, but for some reason I didn't care at the time. I was stupid, and even after that, I didn't bother to change my password. At the time, I viewed all of these happenings as random, isolated incidents. I had no valuable stuff on my account and didn't have any private secretive messages. What harm could they do, right? A few months pass when one day my wife gets a message from Carrie stating that she had bought a high-end video camera and was looking to start some amateur filming. She wanted to know if we could help her by letting her film our family for a day. Remembering what Maya had said a few months ago, I was reluctant but wanted to give Carrie the benefit of the doubt, so we agreed to tell her that we'd schedule a time for her whenever we weren't busy and left it at that. Once again, I have yet to actually meet Carrie. More weeks pass by and we completely forget about scheduling the film shoot when Carrie messages me about it. I turn her down. Then things got weird. She sent several GIF files of stick figures doing sexually suggestive motions and gyrations. I didn't respond, so she asked, "Funny, isn't it?" I immediately texted my wife to log into my Facebook profile to observe the messages. Not wanting to be rude, I agreed with Carrie as of the humor in the GIFs she sent and carried on the conversation. She proceeded to send me old photos from my abandoned MySpace account that I had completely forgotten about. That was around the time when MySpace had been revamped and people lost a lot of cherished memories. Somehow she dug mine up and decided to share them with me. It was creepy to me. Things escalated quickly from there. She began talking about her body and how she wasn't attractive, trying to bait me into complimenting her looks. She was not beautiful, but she was an attractive person. I didn't bite though. Then she hit me with something out of the blue. She asked me about my penis, calling it my cock and suggesting that it was probably pretty big. I decided that was enough and stopped responding. Of course, my wife was reading the whole time and we were texting back and forth about how funny and weird this all was. I continued to go to work and still awkwardly never actually met Carrie. I especially didn't want to strike up any conversations after that. Carrie messaged me one final time asking for a favor. Maya had blocked her profile and Carrie suspected that Maya was saying bad stuff about her, so she wanted me to check her profile to confirm. I told her that I wasn't going to stalk Maya for her and that was that. Just between us though, I did check and no, Maya couldn't care less to waste her time talking about Carrie. Around this time, my wife got a text from an unknown number. The person knew her name but was trying to remain anonymous and was trying to flirt with her. We were with a bunch of friends at the time and we all thought it'd be funny if we all text flirted with this person at the same time to annoy them. Once again, I never thought to connect any of the incidents. Carrie eventually quit work and I never saw her again, but I continued to get suspicious activity and friend requests that I, stupidly, continued to write off. I had all but forgotten about Carrie. Then, I'd say over a year later, I get a bomb from my wife. A good friend of ours texted her that I was sending her very inappropriate messages on Facebook. I had been busy running errands all day and hadn't really checked my Facebook at the time. I found that my password had been changed when I finally logged back on. All of my messages had also been cleared. I had no idea the extent of what happened until I started hearing from people that I was being very suggestive and nasty to them. The thing was, these weren't random women on my friends list that were targeted. These were women that were close to me, good friends, my wife's sisters, my friends' wives. These messages weren't holding back either. They went all out in graphic detail about what I wanted to do to them. I felt completely violated and humiliated. I couldn't imagine how the women felt. My wife and I were really close to our families and friends, and every other week or so, all of our friends would get together and drink, BBQ, watch movies or sports and hang out. We'd seen several families over and never had a problem. All of them said they understood what happened and that they know it wasn't me. Deep inside though, I could see that they felt that it possibly, potentially, probably was me. Over time, More and more of them stopped coming over to the point where my home started to feel empty. I confided in my wife how I felt that they think it was me, and she rebutted that I was just being paranoid. She argued that our friends were just busy with their lives, that they'd eventually come over when they were free again. I then learned that someone had created a Facebook account using my name and picture and had continued harassing the same women. One of them posted a picture of the conversation with this false me on Facebook. She commented that it could really be me because that mystery person has used some words that I typically would. She also stated that the person knew my friends and family extensively. My heart instantly shattered reading that. I quit checking my Facebook for the longest time, and I guess I fell into a mild depression. I felt miserable. I told my wife that I wanted to disappear and strongly considered quitting my job of 7 years and moving away to start anew. I now know that I was being quite irrational, and thankfully my wife stayed strong for me through it all. I felt like I needed to defend my honor and started gathering alibis of times, people, and places I was around during the time of many of those messages. My wife brutally told me that she couldn't believe I was weak enough to let a no-life dumbass on Facebook put me down and make me feel that way. Which is true. I am and always have been a very mentally strong person. I always look for the best in a bad situation, but for some reason this affected me differently. I can't explain why, but I felt extreme shame and guilt for something I didn't even do. Without my wife's support knocking me back to reality, I don't know what would have happened. We advised our friends just to ignore the person, and eventually everything stopped. From time to time, I still get a random friend request, but I don't accept them anymore. I don't have any proof that this was all the work of Carrie. It just all happened during a time when she injected herself into my life and eventually stopped after she left. My friends have started coming over again, but it hasn't felt the same ever since then. I don't know if it's them or just in my head. My wife and I came to the conclusion that Carrie reveled in the misery of others. After tormenting Maya, she moved on and targeted me, trying to ruin my marriage and distance me from friends for no other reason than the fact that she enjoyed doing so. I'm sure she hasn't stopped and only left me alone because she found a new victim to harass. My next-door neighbor was the best you could dream of. She worked nights and when she was off, rarely made a peep. Her little dog was a concern early on, but I would soon discover it was as quiet as its owner. I'd been at the complex for a year when she told me she found a boyfriend and things were going well. After that, I saw her even less than before and was more than happy to sign another 12-month lease. Things proved to be too good to be true, however. Barely a month into my second year, things began to change drastically next door. Loud arguments were often heard through the walls, and the dog reacted to these as badly as I did. The poor little guy barked his head off while she and the new love of her life screamed at each other repeatedly. I did attempt to ignore the racket for a couple of weeks, but would finally lose my mind and began banging on the wall. I was shocked that it worked, but only the first time. All the others after were ignored. This garbage went on for over 3 months, and after several visits from the cops, she showed up at my door to apologize. She claimed things were going well, just as she had told me prior, but after he moved in, his behavior changed. After that, it seemed all they would do is fight. He had hit her during one, and she foolishly forgave him. He'd sworn it would never happen again, but it did, and she kicked him out. Her hope was that he'd move on to someone else. However, he soon appeared at her door out of the blue, begging her to take him back. The cops were called, and she filed a restraining order. That was almost a month ago, and she hoped he was gone for good. From what I could see and hear, things had gone back to the way they had been originally. I went back to living a peaceful life, and I assumed so had she. Considering we had opposite schedules, it wasn't strange for us to go weeks without seeing or hearing one another, and I was happy for it to stay that way. Then something terrifying would happen one day as I returned from work. I pulled into the complex and turned to enter my section of the lot and was blocked by several cop cars and ambulances. It was a surprising thing to see, but none of my business, I suppose. I found another spot to park and headed for my apartment. As I neared my place, I noticed my neighbor's door was wide open and cops were going in and out. After what she'd told me, I assumed her ex had showed up uninvited. Upon approaching our building, another officer stopped me and informed me the area was closed. I let him know I lived in the building and asked what had happened. He couldn't tell me, but if I waited for a detective to come out, he'd probably have some questions for me. The cop said something over his radio, and a minute later a guy in a suit came out of the apartment and took me aside. He only had a few questions, if I'd seen anything and the like. As the seconds passed, I got increasingly nervous and begged him to tell me what was going on. He paused and said in a very serious voice that my neighbor had been found dead in her apartment earlier that day. My eyes had to have looked like saucers to him. I was completely shocked and wondered how I hadn't noticed something so major. Before he could ask the question, I blurted out her ex's name. They were familiar with him, and I could tell from his demeanor he was their main suspect. He handed me his card and let me go. I turned to walk away, but stopped a few steps later. What's going to happen to her dog? The detective hesitated, and a sad look popped up on his face. The assailant appears to have killed him too. I'm sorry. I'm not sure why this angered me so much. Struck me as needless, I guess. The cops probably thought I was crazy, mumbling cuss words under my breath as I walked away. The following morning I was browsing through the local paper online and came across a story about the murder. It explained that my neighbor was a week late on her rent and received a notice. When no reply came after 2 days, the manager visited the apartment personally. There was no answer, even after she knocked, so she let herself in and found the body. The detective was quoted as saying that they had yet to find her ex, and they believed that he had fled back to his original home in Lebanon. Not much information has come out since then. The ex-boyfriend is still unlocated and no other suspects exist at this time. I've moved on to a different apartment complex now, but for the remainder of my time in that one, things went back to business as usual. 2 months before my lease was up, new tenants moved in. This was a young couple with a 5-year-old boy. The noise coming from them was endless, and I was overjoyed when the time came for me to move. The place I'm now in is majority older couples, and the noise level is almost non-existent. As nice as things are at present, I don't believe I'll ever have a neighbor as good as her. Anytime I hear a bang on my ceiling or loud talking through the walls, I think back on her and how great of a woman and neighbor she was. I had a female neighbor as a kid. Her family was a little odd. They do very unsafe things like chuck throwing stars at each other. Normally the stars never struck one of them, except for this one time when the girl threw one at her younger brother and it stuck in the back of his forearm. It wasn't really deep, mind you, but it still was deep enough to not fall out when he moved the arm. Instead of freaking out like any sane 10-year-old would, he laughed and pulled the thing out. Rather than calling it quits for the day, he threw it back at her. For a while, I thought it was because they were half Japanese and that's just what they did, but as I grew up, I realized that they were just crazy people. When I was 16, the girl and I started messing around. I'm not sure how it happened. One day I was hanging out at their house and I realized I was attracted to her. Not long after, we happened to be wrestling around with each other and she pinned me down and began kissing me. It was all uphill from there. Some days we'd only touch one another's bodies, and some days it went all the way. We'd been doing our best to hide what we were doing, but one day her older brother found out and decided to torture me for it. I never could get a straight answer from her on how he found out, but he had, and that was all that mattered. When he first approached me, I lied, but he saw right through me. Next, I began apologizing, but he still said nothing. His silence was terrifying, but not as much as the knife he was holding in his hand. At that moment, I was standing roughly 10 feet away from him. I eventually ran out of things to say, and we just stared at each other. The long seconds started to get to me, and I yelled at him to say something. Instead, he smiled, raised his hand, and threw the knife at me. I instinctively cowered and covered my head, but it sailed above me and hit the wall. There was no way I was going to stick around and become a pincushion, so I fled across the living room. He kept up his silent treatment. It was clearly working. I stopped to turn to look and see where he was. I saw him bend over and pick up the knife. When he'd seen I'd stopped, he threw it. Again. I saw what he was about to do and ran out the front door of the house. I didn't stop this time until I was inside my own house. As I ran into our living room, my mom stopped me and asked why I was running. It wasn't the first time I'd come running into the house, but I must have been horrified looking. I very nearly blurted out, but remembered what had initiated the chase in the first place. Telling my mom anything about what I'd been doing or even admitting I had those type of thoughts scared me much more than having sharp things thrown at me. So I told her I was very thirsty and was running into the kitchen to get a Coke. I'm not sure she believed me, but let it go and I slipped off to the kitchen. Later in the day, my playmate called me to come over, but I swore I'd never go over there again, as long as her brother was around. She didn't know what had happened until I explained it to her. I hoped she'd get mad about how I was treated. Instead, she changed the subject and said she'd come over to my house. It was a little harder to mess around at my place. My folks were always around, at least one of them. I was kind of mad she didn't stick up for me and obviously still shaken from nearly dying, but she was able to take my mind off of all of that rather easily. We took the opportunity to make up when my mom stepped out for a few things, and we continued messing around any chance we had. I did stick by my pledge, however. I didn't step 1 foot in her house for the remainder of my time living with my folks. College came around in a few years, and other than small visits at holidays, her and I never saw each other after I left. I did run into her older brother during one Thanksgiving. Even though we were both adults now and many years had passed since our talk, the memory of it was still strong, and I expected him to chuck a knife at me any second.
When I was in my early 20s and fresh out of college, I lived in some pretty sketchy, albeit cheap apartment buildings in the US. Now, something to note is that the walls in my apartment block out almost no sound. And because of this, I would almost always hear my neighbor to the left of me blasting his music. Though, if I'm being honest, it didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. I would just simply play my own music to not hear it as loud. One night, I could tell he had been drinking a lot, simply from the way I could hear him stumbling across his room. I also figured his girlfriend must have been there, as I could hear him practically yelling at her, which unfortunately wasn't all that uncommon. Usually when things get that loud, I try to get away from it all, and seeing as it wasn't that late, I decided to head out for the night with some friends. We went to a few clubs, and overall had a good time. Fast forward to around 1 AM or so, and my friends were dropping me back off at my apartment. Though, as we were driving into the parking lot, in the distance we could see my neighbor outside crouched down in between some cars and the apartment building. Okay, kinda weird, but I figured it was whatever, as the guy was just generally creepy anyway. My friends were clearly more weirded out than I was. I honestly didn't think much of it, and just had them drop me off near the gate entrance, as it would be easier for them to leave the parking lot that way. But as I was walking toward my apartment building, I swear my heart dropped. I noticed my neighbor was now standing perfectly still in one of the bushes that was between two of the apartment buildings. As I got closer, it was clear he thought I didn't see him. To break the tension, I waved at him and mumbled a greeting, as I wasn't just going to pretend that I couldn't see him. After doing so, he stepped out of the bush and came into the dim streetlight, not saying a word, but rather just staring at me. Never in my life have I looked into eyes so widened and fully dilated. The whole encounter was disturbing to say the least, but I tried to ignore it and continued into the building. Right as I got to my apartment door, I got inside and went straight to bed. I was exhausted and just wanted to forget everything and go to sleep. Although, all through the night, I could hear thumps and rustling that sounded like furniture moving. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of cops outside banging on my neighbor's door.
New York City Police Department!
I was partially relieved to hear them, but that quickly turned to fear of why they were there in the first place. I could hear them take him away in handcuffs, and shortly after the police started knocking on my door. They asked me when the last time I had talked to or seen him was, and without hesitation, I told the officer everything that had happened the other night. The yelling, the noises, the encounter in the parking lot, and even the rustling sounds all night. But what I was told next will forever haunt me. I was told that my neighbor had brutally murdered his girlfriend that night. They said he dragged her body outside and into a nearby ditch behind the apartment buildings. And that's when I realized that the other night I was looking at a person who had just taken another human being's life. I honestly felt terrible for the woman. To this day, what disturbs me most is how close I was to death, quite literally, and how he could have ambushed me out of insanity, since he was just waiting in the darkness when I walked up. I moved into a different apartment in a better part of town shortly after the occurrence.
Ever since I first went to Chick-fil-A, it's been one of my favorite restaurants. I've always loved their chicken sandwiches, and their sauce always hits the spot. However, the college that I recently graduated from is in an area where there's no Chick-fil-A nearby, so when I was at school, I could never have it. Last year, when the semester finally came to an end, I was driving back home to get to my parents' house, and I had the idea to get Chick-fil-A. I left my school in the morning, and it was a 4-hour drive to get back home. When I got about an hour away from home, my cravings got the better of me, and I saw a Chick-fil-A and stopped. It was a Chick-fil-A that I had never been to before, but it looked relatively new and was very busy. I got in the drive-thru line, which was long but moving fast. I ordered the number 1, which is what I usually got, of a chicken sandwich, fries, and a drink. I was so hungry that I decided to park and eat it there. The Chick-fil-A was in a large shopping area that had a mall with a really big parking lot connected to it, so I drove to an open area of the mall parking lot that wasn't very busy. I started to eat, but before long I was kind of annoyed with the way that the sun was shining right into my front window onto me. I moved parking spaces down to where there was a shady spot near a tree. As I backed up my car out of the spot and started to drive, I saw that there was another car that was parked a little ways away from me that started to leave at the same time. I drove over and parked next to a tree, and the car followed me and parked about 10 spots away from me. I found it odd, but overall was more focused on eating. A while later, when I decided to continue with my drive home, I had forgotten all about the car and started to drive away. But when I did, I noticed the car start to drive with me. I never bothered to look to see who was driving it, and it was too far away to tell by this point. I once again found it odd, but what could I do? I got back on the road and then merged onto the freeway that was close by. I noticed the entire time that the car that was seemingly following me did the same. I got kind of worried when I saw this. I wondered why someone would follow me. Had I accidentally cut him off or something before? I kept on driving down the road and the car remained behind me the entire time. I tried some things like slowing down or changing lanes, but he kept following me. I still couldn't really tell much about how the driver looked because I still wasn't able to get a very good look at him. The closer I got to home, the more concerned I became because I didn't want to go all the way home and have this guy potentially know where I live. When I got about 10 minutes away from home, I decided to pull off the highway again and take the exit. I didn't really have much of a plan, but I knew I shouldn't go to my house with somebody following me. There was a little town that had a few stores and gas stations. I pulled into the parking lot of a supermarket and parked in a spot in the back where there weren't many other cars. Of course, the car that was following me did as well. I got out my phone and called my parents. I was going to tell them that I had been followed and ask them what to do. But before I could finish telling them, I saw that the car had parked in a spot behind me and a few spaces to the left. I noticed that the driver's door of the car opened, and both passengers' doors in the back did as well. I saw 3 large men all get out of the car and start heading towards me. In this moment, as they approached my car, I panicked and slammed my foot on the gas pedal and sped away. I saw the men then stop and begin to run back to their car. This is where I got lucky in a way. There happened to be a police car that was driving on the quiet road connecting the supermarket with other businesses. When he saw me speeding away in an almost reckless way, he pulled me over. The car that was following me slowed down too, but then drove away. When the officer got to my window, he told me I was driving a little wild, and I told him my situation. He then gave me just a warning to slow down and drive safer, and offered to drive behind me for a few miles to make sure that I wasn't followed. I took him up on the offer, and luckily I was able to make it home safely without ever seeing that car again. I still wonder sometimes though why that car was following me for so long, and what the men wanted.
Back when I was living on the streets, well, technically in my car, I would always post up by fast food restaurants because people would always give me their change or some of the food that they had recently purchased. One day I posted at the entrance of a plaza, and in that plaza the busiest place was a Chick-fil-A. Throughout the day I received a few bucks and a lot of chicken nuggets. After being out there for a few hours, I noticed a car that left a few times and came back to park in the Chick-fil-A parking lot with covered license plates. But the person never got out of the car. Of course I thought it was weird, but I didn't think anything of it. Throughout the day, I'd take my food to my car and I'd eat. Around 8 p.m., most of the plaza was closing up, and the traffic started to slow down. Finally, when Chick-fil-A slowed down for a few minutes, a man in the car got out and he walked up to the door of the restaurant and took a picture of the inside. A few seconds later, what looked like the manager came outside, and it looked like she was arguing with the guy. She went back inside and the man got back in his car, got on his phone, and left about 5 minutes later. FYI, I was parked about 25 feet away from the Chick-fil-A parking lot and could see everything that was going on. So a few hours go by and the place was closed. From the outside, it looked as if the employees were cleaning up. I was trying to fall asleep, then I saw that car from earlier pull up. Then it woke me all the way up. There were 2 cars left in the parking lot. His car and some other car. And some people left. The only person I saw inside was the woman that he was talking to earlier. I saw the man get out of his car at this point. He was wearing dark colors and with gloves on. And I saw the lights get turned off inside of Chick-fil-A. The man was standing on the side of the building by a dumpster, but in a way where he can't be seen. He was in the shadows. At that point, I leaned my seat all the way back so no one could see me. The woman walked out, turned around, and began to lock the door. As soon as she turned around, that man sprinted toward her, yanked her hair, and started to yell at her as he took her back inside. I leaned up a little bit to get a better look, but I couldn't see anything. There was nothing for about 10 minutes, until the man walked back outside. He went straight to his car, but instead of driving away, he drove up to the door and went back in with his trunk left open. A few minutes later, I saw something that I would never forget. The man was dragging the woman's body, but there was no head. He struggled to get her in the trunk, but eventually he got her there. He went back in there and came out with a Chick-fil-A bag full of something and threw it in his trunk. He went back inside again for what seemed like 20 minutes. He came back out, locked up Chick-fil-A, and drove away. Someone else came back for the other car in the parking lot. A few days later, I went into a Starbucks to use the restroom, and on the news was a story about a missing woman. They showed the picture, and it was the woman who worked at Chick-fil-A. They were interviewing her husband, who was crying during the whole interview. What creeped me out is that her husband was the man that I saw with her that fateful night. I know he killed her, but he was on the news as if he didn't have anything to do with it, and like he doesn't know. Seeing that lady that night has haunted me since. I'm a 32-year-old female living in Colorado, and Halloween is by far my favorite time of the year. But one Halloween stands out in my mind that I'll never forget, and it's not for the right reasons. It was 2007 and I was about 17 years old. Once it got dark, I met up with a few of my friends, Brittany, Rick, Curtis, and Micah. We were walking around a trailer park smoking weed and taking shots and just having a good time. We must have been walking for about 20 minutes when we came up on this group of guys that were smoking a meth pipe just out in the open. We just walked straight past them when one of them yelled, "Hey," as loud as possible. We all stopped and turned around, and Curtis said, "Yeah?" One of the guys asked in a demanding voice, "Want to give me a hit of what you got there?" Curtis held up the roach. We just finished smoking, and he said, "Sorry, man. We just finished it off." They didn't reply. They just turned away from us. Suddenly, one of them turned around and asked for $5. Again, Curtis responded, "Sorry, man, I'm broke." The guy gave a really weird smile, baring his crooked yellow teeth, but his eyes were dead and cold. It was very unsettling and clearly a forced smile. He then said, "Oh, all right. You guys have a good night." We turned back and started walking away. Something was off about that group of people. But then again, they were on hard drugs. We walked for about a minute until I heard a bunch of people running up behind us. It was Halloween at that time, so there was a lot of people everywhere. But it was that group of people again, and they were coming up fast. We bolted down the road, and everyone ran off in different directions. I jumped a few fences and hid inside a random person's shed. My heart was beating so hard I thought it was about to explode. I waited about 20 minutes, slowly opened the shed, and peered out. I didn't see anyone, so I started to look for my friends. Found Brittany and Rick. We looked around for Curtis and Micah. Curtis' phone was dead and Micah wasn't answering. We finally found Curtis. One of those psychos stabbed him in the leg and took his wallet, and his jeans were soaked in blood. We called 911 right away. Then we found Micah laying on the sidewalk. She could barely get up, and she told us that two of the guys jumped her and beat her, as well as stealing her money from her pocket. For reference, Micah is about 115 pounds and 5'1". It disgusts me to think that full-grown men were so high that they thought it was okay to beat up an innocent small girl like that. It definitely ruined one of my favorite holidays, and I still think about it these years later. If a random group of people ever call out to you, just keep walking. Always carry a taser, pepper spray, just any weapon. You never know what kind of weirdos are lurking out there in the dark.
The story happened to my brother, and it's told from his perspective. On Halloween of 2017, I went trick-or-treating with my friends, who I'll call Harvey, Michael, and Daniel. We were all around 14 to 15 years old, and really just wanted to make the most of this Halloween, as we would have had so much homework starting the 10th grade, and we'd probably never be able to trick-or-treat again. Anyway, we were walking down this random street at like 9:30 when we saw this one house with like really insane over-the-top Halloween decorations that looked like they cost up to $500. The four of us walked up to the house and we rang the bell. Some 50-year-old guy opened the door and then said,
"No need to yell. Just come in and you'll get your sweets."
Daniel told the guy, can't you just bring the candy out here?" The guy didn't even answer, so the four of us just walked away, not saying a single word. But of course, the story wouldn't be scary if it ended here. We were walking down my street when Harvey pointed out, "Guys, I think that man is following us." We all looked behind us and we saw that same 50-year-old man walking about 25 feet behind us. The four of us then bolted all the way down to my house. We were all way too scared to even think about revealing where I lived to this psycho. We thrust open the front door, entered my house, and locked the door. The four of us were just hyperventilating, as if we had just run like a 75-mile marathon. I was starting to calm down when Michael then said, "Dude, look at the window." We all looked, and there he was. The old man was looking through one of my windows. My parents were on vacation at the time, and my older brother was at his friend's Halloween party, so we couldn't tell them. But what really made this horrifying was I could see the guy holding a Saturday Night Special in his hand. We all ran upstairs and called the police. The officers arrived in 10 minutes. The man wasn't on my property anymore, but we remembered the house he was in. The cops went there, searched the whole place, and then came out with the man in chains. As it turns out, the house was vacant, and the man was a serial killer who had escaped prison a month ago. If my friends and I are ever able to go trick-or-treating again, we're definitely avoiding the street that house is on. And who really knows what the guy would have really wanted to do to my friends and I, had we been naive enough to enter that house. I will say though, I'm really glad this happened when we were teenagers and not like 9 years old. All I can say is if you're trick-or-treating, make sure the house owner is completely normal. And if a single thing seems off in the slightest, just walk away.
I worked at a Chick-fil-A a few years back. This was the weirdest thing to ever happen. When I worked there, I would oftentimes be at the drive-thru window handing customers their food. On one day, I don't remember the exact day of the week, but I know it was a weekday. Things were not all that busy and it was in the afternoon. I remember we had a lot of cars in the drive-thru window, and I dealt with many different people. At one point though, I recognized a man that I was handing food to. He had been there not long ago. It was a little weird, but I gave him his food and moved on. Then I saw him again about 20 minutes later. This time, he only ordered a drink. I gave it to him and he left, only to come back again 10 minutes later ordering another drink. This time, I jokingly made a comment to the man that he was here again, but the man denied it. He claimed this was his first time there and I was wrong. He also didn't seem very friendly at all. He kind of said it in a rude way. I gave him his drink and he left. I didn't see him for another 30 minutes or so, but then he came back again. This time, he just got a water. Every time he would come back, he would seemingly order just one small thing. I was really confused by this behavior. He came back several more times, getting small items each time, and he seemed angry as well. It was one of the strangest things that I had seen. I got off of work that night, and on my way home had to stop at the store to get a couple of things. I was in the store for no longer than 5 minutes, when suddenly I saw the same man walking down an aisle about 20 feet away. He didn't seem to notice me. I thought this was an insane coincidence, and I felt kind of creeped out because of just how crazy it was. I ended up leaving the store shortly after, and in the coming days I forgot about the man for the most part. But less than a week later, I was at my house taking out the trash when I saw the same man once again. This time he was walking down my street. I lived in a fairly big neighborhood, but I had never seen him prior to being at the Chick-fil-A. I felt really creeped out and went back inside. I'm not sure if the man saw me or not, but after that occurrence, I've never seen the man since. I just think it's really creepy how all that happened. Sometimes I wonder if he was stalking me or something like that. In fact, it's so crazy that a lot of people don't believe me when I tell them the story, but I know what happened. Either way, I'm glad I haven't seen the man since.
It was Halloween of 2012, and I was closing at work, which is Chick-fil-A. We were a new establishment in the area that we're in, and the neighborhood was pretty bad. In and out all afternoon and evening, I saw hundreds of people dressed in their costumes. All of the cliche costumes, Jason, Freddy Krueger, and Michael Myers. At around 7:30, there was a long line inside, and out of nowhere there was some commotion. My manager came out to break it up. When he broke it up, some guy in the Ghostface costume from Scream ran out of the door. That person that ran out of the door got into it with a woman that was dressed as Meg from Family Guy. At least that's what I thought she was, until she told us that she wasn't in costume. She was just ugly. Anyway, this woman told our manager and the cops that some person in a Ghostface costume tried to lure her 7-year-old daughter out of the building to his car. The little girl was running back and forth between her mother, who was in line, and the play area inside. I guess the man in the Scream costume told the girl that her mom told her to wait in his car, and he grabbed her. The mom turned around and saw it. Then she started to yell and scream. A few hours later, we locked the doors, and then some guy knocked at our drive-thru window. He had on a Ghostface costume from the movie Scream, but I don't know if it was the same guy from earlier. I yelled out that we're closed, and this guy tries to bust through the drive-thru window. I screamed, and the manager ran out, and then that man ran to our front door banging. Then he stopped and just stared at us. At that point, it was just my manager and I. My manager called the cops, and the man left and popped his trunk of his car. He grabbed something out of his trunk and put it under his costume. He then walked back up to the front door. He stared for another 30 seconds and pulled out a gun from under his costume, aimed it and pulled the trigger. We both ducked and screamed, but nothing happened. We looked up and he was fumbling with his gun. He was loading, unloading, and reloading. It had jammed. Then the cops showed up with their guns drawn. He got on the ground and they arrested this guy. We found out that this was a dangerous guy and he had a huge rap sheet, and we were pretty lucky that nothing happened to us that night. It may be cowardly, but I quit that job soon after that happened because of the neighborhood that Chick-fil-A was in.